My name is Eli Mercer, and I was 33 the day my own father laughed at me in a lawyer's office. We were there for the reading of my grandfather's will. The lawyer cleared his throat, looked at me, and said I had inherited the house on Sycamore Road and $10. The room exploded. My dad leaned back, grinning, and said it loud enough for everyone. You wasted your time on a broke old man. Now you get a pile of junk. I didn't argue. I smiled, picked up the worn bill they slid across the table, and walked out. What none of them understood was that the bill had a number on it. My grandfather had spent my whole childhood teaching me how to read numbers like that. 48 hours later, I knew exactly what they'd done. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where the people who get underestimated keep their voices low and let the truth do the shouting. If you've ever been handed the smallest seat at the table, this one is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The office belonged to Howard Pruitt, who had handled Mercer family business for 30 years. He had a way of reading legal documents like he was apologizing for them. My Uncle Curtis sat near the window in a pressed gray suit, calm as a man who already knew the ending. His wife, Brenda, kept checking her phone. My two cousins took the good chairs. My father, Raymond, took the head of the table like it was his by right. I sat by the door. Pruitt started with the store. Curtis would keep operational control of Mercer Hardware and Supply. Raymond would receive the cash accounts. The cousins each got a small sum. Then Pruitt reached my name, and his voice slowed. To my granddaughter, Eli, I leave the house on Sycamore Road and $10. For a breath, nobody spoke. Then Brenda laughed first, a short bark, and the rest followed. Curtis didn't laugh. He watched me. That was the part I would remember later. Pruitt slid an envelope across the table, and inside was a single $10 bill, soft as cloth, the corners rounded from handling. My father wiped his eyes like the whole thing was the best joke he'd heard in years. $10 and a tear down, he said. He really did love you, kid. I held the bill and felt how thin it was, how deliberately old. My grandfather kept new bills for groceries and old ones for lessons. He never handed me a worn one by accident. So I asked myself the only question that mattered in that room full of laughter. Why would a man who labeled every screw in his workshop leave me exactly this, and nothing else? I put the envelope in my coat, said thank you to Pruitt, and stood up. Nobody noticed I wasn't upset. People in town knew me as the quiet one at the library. I ran the branch on 3rd Street, reshelved returns, helped retirees with their tax forms, and ate lunch at my desk. I liked order. I liked a system that told the truth when you followed it all the way down. For the last 5 years of Walter's life, I was also the one who showed up. I drove him to his cardiologist on the 2nd Tuesday of every month. I filled his pillbox on Sundays. I sat with him while the rest of the family was always, somehow, busy. I never minded. That was my weakness, if you want to call it that. I carried things nobody asked me to carry, because putting them down felt like quitting. My grandfather understood that about me better than anyone. When I was 8, he used to hide a quarter somewhere in the house and leave me a string of numbers on a notepad. Count carefully, he'd say, tapping the page. The numbers were never random. They were a route, a page in a book, a tile from the corner, a drawer from the left. It took me a summer to learn his patterns. After that, I could read him like a map. The family thought it was a silly game an old man played with a lonely kid. To me, it was the first real conversation I ever had with someone who believed I was clever. So when my father called my inheritance a pile of junk, I didn't feel small. I felt the worn edges of that $10 bill in my pocket, and I thought about a man who never once gave me a number that didn't lead somewhere. The laughter in that office made sense once you knew what my family thought Walter was. He opened Mercer Hardware in 1968 with a loan and a handshake. For decades, it was the place where every contractor in the county bought their nails and every kid bought their first pocket knife. Then my father and uncle grew up, came into the business, and decided the old man was holding it back. They modernized. They added a second register, a credit line, a back office with a computer Walter never touched. Slowly, they moved him to the front counter, then to a stool by the door, then home. By the time I was in college, the family story was settled. Walter had been a decent man and a poor businessman. He'd let the store slide, never saved, never invested, and would die with nothing. Raymond repeated it so often it became gospel. "Dad means well," he'd say, but he couldn't run a lemonade stand. I believed it too, for a while. Why wouldn't I? The man drove a 15-year-old truck and clipped coupons. But there was one thing that never fit. Walter was the most exact person I ever met. He balanced his checkbook to the penny. He kept receipts in chronological order going back to the Nixon administration. A man like that doesn't lose track of money by accident. Once, near the end, he held my hand on the porch and said something I filed away without understanding. "The store was never the point, Eli. I thought he was being sentimental." Now I had a house full of his careful order and a worn bill in my pocket, and I started to wonder what the point actually was. The store was their crown. It turned out it was also their alibi. I drove out to the Sycamore house 2 days after the funeral. It sat at the edge of town, 15 minutes from my apartment, on a road that turned to gravel near the end. From the outside, my father wasn't wrong. The porch sagged on one corner. The gutters had given up. A shutter hung crooked like a loose tooth. Anyone glancing from the road would see a tear down and keep driving. I let myself in with the key Pruitt had given me, and the smell hit me first: cedar and machine oil, the exact smell of my grandfather's hands. For a second, I was 8 years old again, standing in his workshop while he sharpened a chisel. Then I looked around, and the contradiction settled in. The house was falling apart on the outside and perfectly ordered on the inside. Every book on the shelf was alphabetized. The kitchen drawers were labeled in his small block printing. The closet held shirts arranged by color, then by age. This was not the home of a man who had stopped caring. This was the home of a man who cared about everything and wanted it to look like he didn't. I walked the room slowly, the way I walk the stacks at closing, checking that everything is where it should be. Nothing was dusty. Nothing was random. On the wall by the back door hung a calendar from the hardware store. 2 years old, every doctor's appointment marked in his hand, including the ones I had driven him to. He had kept a record of me showing up. I stood there longer than I meant to. A tear down, my father called it. But you don't label every drawer in a house you've given up on. You label them because you expect someone to come looking. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and took out the bill. I smoothed it flat under the lamp and looked at the serial number, the way I hadn't let myself in the lawyer's office. The string of letters and digits ran along the bottom corner, and the moment I read it, something old woke up in me. The grouping was wrong for a random bill. Walter's number games always started the same way: a pair of letters that meant a category, then digits that meant a location. I read it again. The first letters matched a code we used for the workshop. The digits split cleanly into 2 short runs, the way a drawer number and a row number would. My hands went cold, not from fear, but from recognition. He hadn't left me $10. He'd left me an instruction. I found a pencil and copied the number onto the back of a library receipt, then broke it into pieces the way he taught me. Letters first, then the long run, then the short one. It pointed toward the workshop, and inside the workshop, toward something counted from a corner. I didn't go out there that night. I sat with it instead, turning the bill over in my fingers, hearing his voice as clearly as if he were across the table. Count carefully. For most of my life, I'd thought that was just how he said be patient. Now I understood it was a literal set of directions, waiting 25 years for the only person who'd bothered to learn the language. The room they'd laughed in flashed back to me. My father's grin, Brenda's bark, Curtis watching. They thought the joke was that I got nothing. The joke was that I was the only one he trusted with everything. My father called the next morning before I'd finished my coffee. He skipped hello. "I've been thinking about that house," he said, friendly in the way that always means a trap. "It's a liability. Bad wiring, mold, the whole thing. You hold on to it, you'll be paying taxes on a teardown for years." I said I hadn't decided anything yet. "Well, don't overthink it," he said. "I know a developer. Cash offer, quick close, takes the headache off your hands. You sign, you walk away clean." There it was. The speed. My father had never once moved fast to help me with anything. Now he wanted papers signed before the estate had even cleared probate. I'm not a dramatic person, but I am a careful one, and careful people notice when someone is suddenly in a hurry. So I did what I always do when something doesn't add up. I asked a question. "Why's he in such a rush for a place that's falling down?" There was a small pause, the kind you can hear. "He flips lots," my dad said. "Don't make it weird, Eli." I told him I'd think about it, hung up, and did 3 things. I photographed every room in the house. I called Pruitt's office to confirm the probate timeline and learned nothing could close for weeks. And I wrote down the date and time of my father's call in the notebook I keep for everything. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being a librarian. When a man who never helped you starts pushing you to sign away the one thing he laughed at, you don't sign. You start a record. Brenda texted an hour later, all hearts and concern, asking if I needed help clearing out Grandpa's mess. I didn't answer. The mess, I was starting to think, was the whole point. The workshop stood behind the house, a low building that smelled even more strongly of cedar and oil. Walter had built it himself. Inside, one whole wall was a grid of small wooden drawers, each one numbered in his block print, the way a card catalog used to be before everything went digital. I stood in front of it and read my pencil notes again. The letters from the serial number named this wall. The long run gave me a drawer. The short run gave me a position inside it. I counted carefully, the way he'd drilled into me, and pulled the drawer open. Inside, under a tray of brass fittings, was a notebook with a cracked green spine. It wasn't an inventory book. The cover was worn soft at the corner where a thumb would rest. I lifted it out, and a folded slip of paper fell from between the pages. His handwriting, unmistakable. The line he'd said to me 100 times. "Cheap things hide the truth. Count carefully." I read it twice, then sat down on his work stool with the green ledger in my lap. The first pages looked like ordinary bookkeeping. Dates, amounts, short notes. But the longer I looked, the less ordinary it became. These weren't store sales. The entries tracked money moving out of accounts, not in. Each line had a date, a figure, and a pair of initials. Some of the initials were CM, some were RM, my uncle, my father. I didn't understand the whole picture yet, but I understood enough to feel the floor shift. My grandfather hadn't kept a hardware ledger in a hidden drawer behind a code only I could read. He'd kept something else, and he'd built a quarter-century-long trail of breadcrumbs so that one day the careful granddaughter would follow it out here and open this exact drawer. This wasn't junk. This was a record of something. I took the green ledger home and spread it across my kitchen table under good light, the way I'd lay out a damaged book before repair. I'm trained to read documents that don't want to be read: faded due date cards, water stained donations, marginalia in 3 languages.